All right, today we're going to go through the installation setup process for the Sidekick dust boot. I have all the parts laid out here, and the first thing I want to go through is just kind of give you an inventory of what we have so you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a specific part. Here we have a slide rail. This is what's going to help keep the boot on axis as it moves up and down. There's the rail and the carriage. And by the way, be super careful with these. You have a little clip on the bottom side of this to keep the carriage from sliding off. But that clip is just clipped on. It's very gently there. If there's any weight on this carriage, it'll just push that clip right off and fall to the ground. And then the bearings that are in there are, very likely to fall apart, and you'll just have a heck of a time putting it back together. I've had to do that a few times. I'll try to walk you through it in such a way as you don't have the same bad luck that I did. It'll come with at least a brush, depending on how many brushes you ordered, but at least one, and the track that goes along with that. It has the air hose adapter, which will go up in your air hose. There's 2.5 inch versions, and there's the 4-inch versions. And then there are the mag rings that snap together. One gets attached to the air hose and one gets attached to the top of the boot. We have what I'm gonna call the sweep. I'm not sure if that's the best name for this particular part, but it's good enough, I guess. This is the main body that that controls the airflow. Here is our slide mount. It mounts on the spindle mount, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Here is the riser, and this will attach to the top of the sweep, and it'll connect it to the carriage in a little bit. Here is the piston that we're going to use to drive the boot up and down. And here is a leg, which includes the sensor that is determining where the boot position is. And here is a 3-pin panel mount connector with a little bit of magic happening here under the shrink wrap. Here is a 2-pin panel mount connector. Here is a relay assembly. And then you have two 25-foot 6mm outside diameter air hoses. You have one 6-foot version of the same thing. You have a 14-foot 2-pin connector on a solenoid. You have a 17-foot 3-pin GX12 connector. And then you have a bag of little parts, which we'll go through separately. All right, inside the bag, we have the foot, which attaches to the bottom of the piston. We have a double T-slot nut. We have the relay mount. We have a quick disconnect for the airline, some thumb screws, some zip ties, some M5s, some M4s, some M3s, a couple standoffs, and some M3 button head screws. All right, now let's do some planning. There are 3 major decisions that you need to make. I don't know, maybe they're not major, but you have 3 decisions you need to make about how you're going to do this. The first one is your air supply. You need to decide if you're going to use the additional port on the PwnCNC PE, or if you're going to use a dedicated air supply for the dust boot. Either way is fine. There are some things I'll tell you just so you kind of have a handle on the obvious pros and cons. If you use the PwnCNC additional port, you will have to wire up one additional pin inside the Masso, which I'll show you how to do. And you'll have to toggle that input high so that it's on all the time. Because we just need a consistent airflow. We don't need it to be turned off and on, which is one of the advantages, actually, of using the Masso to control that PwnCNC additional port is that you have the ability to turn it on and off automatically, potentially through G-code. Like for example, I'm going to use it for my air blast, so I can just have my cam program turn on coolant, and it will turn on the air blast for me when I'm cutting aluminum. And that's a pretty cool capability to have it be able to do that automatically, to go on and off like that. And we don't need that capability for the dust boot, where you have to control that a different way. So I'm going to take advantage of that Pwn CNC PE capability in conjunction with the Masso for my air blast, and I'm going to use a dedicated air supply for the dust boot. Now, you also have to think about the location of things, like where are you going to place the solenoid, and that really determines how you're going to manage the air hose that I provide. Now, you really, I think, have two realistic options. Maybe there's something else I haven't thought of, but one, you can put it right by the PE, which is maybe nice if you're using the PE for your air supply, because then you could use potentially the 6-foot section to connect right to the PE, and then have the two 25-footers run up and through your drag chain to the piston. And that's one way to do it for sure. And another way to do it is to place the solenoid by your other air supply and run the 6-foot connection to that, and then run the 25-footers from there to your table and up to the drag chain to your boot. Now that's what I'm going to do, because I just want the solenoid on the wall by my air stuff, where the regulators and dryers and all that stuff is managed. And then and I'll just kind of have it all co-located there nicely, and I'll run two long 25-foot runs all the way through the table and to the drag chain all the way to the boot. Now, either way is fine. You can do it however you want, and you could do it a different way if you wanted to. The thing to note is you have to have one cable from your air supply to the solenoid, and one air line from your solenoid to the air supply, and two from the solenoid to the piston. And you have what I've provided, 25 feet and two lengths of 25 feet and one length of 6 feet to work with. You can cut that up and rearrange it any way you want to, or use them exactly as is uncut. And if you want to do something completely outside the box that I haven't anticipated, you can go get some more of this tubing. It's just 6 millimeter outside diameter, 4 millimeter inside diameter to work in all the push connects that are provided. Okay, the next thing you need to think about is which relay are you going to use? I've provided a relay which has an octocoupler, so it does isolate feedback from hitting the Masso if something were to happen. So it should protect the Masso. But you might also have a Masso relay in there. It's got 6 relays on the board. I do, and that's what I'm going to be using. The Masso relay is probably the better option. It fits perfectly inside the Masso controller. There are standoffs already placed at the perfect spacing to mount the relays. And I'm sure it's a higher quality relay than the one that I'm providing. If you have that relay, you can also do things like use it for tower lights and an alarm and that sort of stuff. And probably all kinds of other things that I haven't even thought about yet. And if you don't want to do that or don't have that relay available, then you can use the one I provided, and I will. There's a relay mount adapter that lets you use the Masso standoffs to at least attach it to the right place, as one option for placement, I guess. So I prefer the Masso relay, but I've provided one for you so you can get up and running if you don't want to go out and get the Masso or don't already have one. With that, let's get into the installation process. Now let's take a look at running the lines that we need to run. First, in the drag chain, you're going to have 3 lines you're going to run. You're going to run the 3-pin GX12 cable. It will run from the piston, which is going to be right about here once we're said and done, over the top, back through the drag chains, and all the way over here to the back of the Masso. So you need to run that. You'll also need to run your 2 equal length, probably the 25-footers, in that drag chain as well. They're not going to terminate at the Masso, though. They're going to go to wherever it is that you're going to store the piston, or sorry, wherever it is that you're going to store the solenoid. And you could put that probably right by the PE if you're going to use the PE for your air supply, and you can also put it buy your air supply if you're going to use a dedicated air supply. And you could do something else if you want to. It's pretty flexible. It's up to you. But I am going to run it all the way back to my air supply and keep my solenoid there. So I have all my air regulators, dryers, and everything all in the same place. And it's just an easy thing for me to think about. So I'll run these. Actually, I'm not going to run these. I've already got these orange ones, and I'm just going to continue to use those. So, but you'll have to do that, and now's a good time to do that. With that, you'll also want to take another length, probably the 6-footer, I would imagine. If you're using the Pwn CNC air supply, that additional port, you can just plug this into the additional port on one end. If you're using your own air supply, you can use this quick disconnect that was in the bag and push it in there, and then attach that to your regulator once we're ready. This end will go into the solenoid. The solenoid has these two mufflers on one side and the input air supply there, and you just plug that right in. And once we're ready, that's wiring that side of it. The other two, the long runs, they're going to get plugged in here. And for now, I just say plug them in. It doesn't really matter which one gets plugged in where. We're going to suss that out a little bit later. And this cable that is attached to the solenoid will run all the way back to the back of the Masso. Doesn't need to go through the drag chain, just runs to the back of the Masso. All right, so I'm going to go do the little bit that I have left to do, and I'll be right back. Now you can see here, I have my solenoid mounted on the wall with all of my other air stuff. And this line right here is the one that goes into, or will go into, this regulator. And I don't have it attached right now because I don't want it to blow air everywhere yet. Another thing to note right here is this is about at 75 psi, which is working for me. We'll go through the tuning here in a little bit, but that's probably a good place to start. And then, of course, I've got the air lines that run off through the drag chains and up to the piston. Those are plugged in as well. And then this cable runs back to the back of the Masso, and that's pretty much it. In a little bit, we'll go through tuning these mufflers along with the air pressure to make sure that everything's working smoothly like we want it to. And for now, the boot side of the airlines are just hanging here. And that's okay. We'll get them plugged in as we get the boot itself assembled. So now we can get the Masso opened up, and we're going to take these first two panel mounts here. And the first thing you need to do in order to actually mount them, if you're going to use the Pwn CNC GX12 mount that came with the ATC, is just remove this washer and nut from both parts. Now I'm going to use that because the Pwn CNC ATC system only used one of the 3 ports, and there's 2 left. So perfect. I'm gonna make use of that for these. Now you don't have to use that. You can just feed these through the back of the enclosure and connect them to the cables in the back, and that'll be fine. But it's nice to have them secured and panel mounted. That's what they're made for. So I'm going to go ahead and shove these in there, and they'll be obviously coming from the back through to the front, so that I can access all these leads with the ferrules from the inside of the Masso. You can see I've got just a whole lot of wire going into the back of my machine. With all this Check Your CNC Out series, I've added quite a bit of stuff, but you can barely see those 2 yellow holes there. That's what I'm going to run those cables through. So I'm going to do that and put the washer and nut back on, and then I'll be back. All right, so I've done that. And now I have my new leads sticking out the front here, which we're going to wire up in a bit. Now, if you're going to use this provided relay, we're going to attach it, at least the recommended way, if it's an option for you, would be to attach it via these this relay adapter. That way you can use the Masso standoffs. So in order to do that, you just attach the standoffs, and you could probably wrench or tighten them down a little bit, but I'm not going to, because I'm actually not going to use this. And then if you mount the relay like so, using a couple of these little button head screws, tiny screws there. Okay. Then you'll be able to use the relay mount just with these other two holes to mount it on the end of where a Masso relay would typically mount. So you can decide whether you want to do that, or maybe you're using those standoffs for something else already. If you are, then that's okay. This doesn't have to mount there. It's just a kind of a convenient option. Boy, little screws. If those standoffs are available to you. And if they're not, you can mount it someplace else. You can get some double-sided sticky foam and just stick this relay down someplace inside the cabinet so it's not flopping around loose, and then you'll be good to go. But that's the first step here, is just to get this standoff little relay assembly put together, and then we can go look at what that looks like lined up with the Masso. See in the Masso here, I've got this relay, this Masso relay, mounted, and it has these 4 screws at the corners that are on standoffs that are from the factory from Masso. So it's got another set of those over here as well, and I happen to be using 2 of them for this power distribution block. So I'm not going to use this this relay mount, or this relay actually, but it would normally line up to those 2 that are sitting right there. You can kind of see there how those holes line up with those 2 shiny screw heads. That's where you could mount it if you wanted to. You don't have to, it's just an option, but that would be one way to do it. Now, with this relay, we wired up, and once you get it mounted up, we would then connect these. I didn't have enough power or grounds to do all the things I wanted to do directly on the Masso, so I added this block. I'll link to that in the description. Just a little cheapy thing from Amazon. It's just every other terminal is either power or ground, so I can break that out and get a lot of extra power and ground ports. And I actually inserted that into the power, 24 volt power that came from Masso, which normally is wired up over here to this, I believe it's normally to the second pin. I cut that wire and inserted my distribution block so I could have more 24 volt power terminals. And the second benefit of this, if you wanted to go this route, is that this allows me to draw power directly off of this from the power supply, not even touching the Masso. So this way, the Masso doesn't have to, it's not even, no currents flowing through the Masso to support all the accessories, and I'm powering directly off the power supply. So that's an extra advantage. Now, what I'd recommend to you is, if you're not going to do that, is to place your power for the solenoid on this first block. This is the input right here, and this would be the one I suggest you use if you're not going to do the distribution block thing that I did for power. And ground, you can use any open black port you want. Again, I'm short on open ones. And then on inputs, I'm going to use input 3 and wire it up there. But we'll take a look at that here in a second. Now we have the relay wired up except to the Masso and probably mounted. In my case, I'm not going to mount it because I've got something in the way and I'm actually not going to use this relay. I'm going to use the Masso. But let's go ahead and wire up the top side of this thing to the Masso. So the way that'll work, we have a ground, which will wire to any ground. I'm going to use a ground on this terminal block that I have, and you might use one of the black terminal blocks on the Masso. And I'm going to use one of the power terminals on this distribution block as well. For red, you'll probably use one of the red blocks on the Masso, preferably on that very first connector that I referenced earlier. And this yellow is going to go to a TTL output. And I'm going to use TTL output 17. And let's go ahead and get that wired up. So first, I'm going to go ahead and wire this into a ground terminal. This is the black one. And it is in a ground terminal. The way this terminal block works, if you happen to get one, every other connector is connected together. So you can use, the first one for ground, the next one for power, the next one for ground, the next one for power, and so forth. And definitely test it with the multimeter so you're sure that's the way it works. So those two are connected. I have my power and ground. Now I'm going to connect this guy into 17, and I'm just going to slide that in right there and tighten him down. There. Now I have that cable fully connected to the relay and to the Masso. Now, for those who are using the Masso relay, let's take a look at that. For those of us who are going to use the Masso relay, we are going to get rid of this relay. We're going to move all these ferrules over to the Masso. Now, I can only think of two cases where you've got the Masso. One is where you've already got the Masso relay installed and working for another purpose, in which case it's already powered up. And in the other case, where this is the first time you're using it, it's a brand new install and you need to get it power. So we're going to try to cover both of those cases. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the TTL output. In my case, I use 17, and that's this yellow. So I'm going to remove that yellow one and put it into the input on the relay for the relay I'm going to use. This is 6 relays on this module. I'm going to use the 6th one for the dust boot. Okay, so I've got that tightened up on the 6th there. Now we're going to handle power. Now, this cable here is one that was already installed when I shipped it to you. It has 3 ends, actually. One of them is the DC power. One of them is the common here in the middle. And the other end we already had wired up to our distribution block over here. Or in your case, maybe it was a red power terminal on the Masso. So there are 2 left to use. If your relay is already running, already has power to it, you don't need to use both of these. You should tape one of them off, and that's what I'm going to do. If you don't have the relay running already, this is the first time you're going to use it, then it needs power as well, and that's how we're going to get it. So the other end of this cable comes from 24 volts. So we're going to go, if this is the first time we're using the relay module, on the top right, this ferrule right here, that terminal needs to go there. I already have mine powered up, so I'm not going to use it. I'm going to tape it off. And the other connector, it really could be either one, either ferrule, because these are electrically equivalent, is going to become the common for relay 6. And the common is on these Masso relays, it is the third terminal on this. So it's the far right. So I'm going to plug this into the far right and tape off the other connector. Okay. Okay. So that has power to the relay and power to pass through the relay is what we have essentially wired up right there. And I'm just going to tape this. I'm going to wrap it around a few times. I'll fold it back on itself and give it a good pinch so it doesn't want to come undone. Okay. All right. The next step is to take the normal close from this little relay, which is this guy, the one on the far right labeled NC, and I'm going to put that into the normal close on the Masso, which is the far left on that relay terminal. So I'm going to tighten him up. And now when the relay kicks, we'll have power flow through the relay, out this, and out to our solenoid. So all we have left to handle is ground. And this is another cable that has two ends, three ends actually. One is going all the way back to the solenoid through the panel mount connector on the back. One we've already got wired up to ground, so we're on the system ground. And the last one needs to be to the DC minus on the Masso relay. Now this is only so if you don't already have that Masso relay powered up. If you do, then this ground is unnecessary. You can just tape it up and be done with it. If you haven't got the Masso powered up and it's the first time you're using it, you're going to want to wire it right there. It's going to go directly under that red ferrule where you had you just wired in a minute ago. Now in my case, my relay is already working, so I don't need to get it ground. I just needed to get ground to the solenoid. So I'm going to go ahead and tape this up, and then I'm done wiring this relay. Okay, and I'm pinching it up real good to stick the tape against itself. Okay, so now the relay is wired. Time to move on to the next step. All right, now we want to wire up the dust boot sensor so we can detect what position it's in. And it'll use the 3 leads coming off of the 3-pin panel mount connector. A red, a black, and a blue. And the red and the black are just like before. We're going to wire those up to any open power and any open ground. Red to power and black to ground. So we'll do that. And the blue is the input to the Masso from the sensor. And I'm going to use input 3 just because that's open, but you could use whichever one you have that is open. So let's go ahead and do this. The first port on the bottom side of my breakout terminal here is a ground. So I'm going to go ahead and wire this up to ground. The black one to that first spot. Now, if you don't have this, you are using a black terminal. Any black terminal on the Masso is fine. The second spot here for me is a power. So I'm going to put the red into the power, and you will put it into, if you don't have one of these, a open red power terminal on the Masso. All we have left is the input from the sensor to the Masso, and we're going to connect that up. So in my case, I'm going to use input 3 just because it's open, but you could use whatever input you'd like. It doesn't have to be 3, just as long as it's free. And then, just make a note of that because we're going to need to know it later. But there we go. Now I have that wired up and he is good to go. Now, I'll call this out. All of my wiring right now is a mess. I need to clean this up. When I installed the ATC, I had to cut all the tie wraps that I had that kind of neatened things up because those I was going through the hole in the back that 3-port panel mount connector fits in, and I had to rerun everything, which was kind of heartbreaking. But once this is all buttoned up here, I will tidy up my wiring as well. So this won't look as bad, hopefully, next time you see it. One more thing for wiring, if you're using the PoneCNC PE's additional port as your air supply, and that is to find the red lead that comes from the PoneCNC GX12 connector that you already had installed when you put the ATC in. So there was an unused red lead. We want to take that and put it into a TTL output. I'm going to use TTL output 8. So I'll just slide that up in there and then put that tightener down. Okay, now that's in there. Those ferrules are darn long and it kind of bugs me, but that's what they are. So now that is wired up, and the Masso will have the ability, once we set it up, to turn that port on and off. And that's it. Now, before we can begin to install the boot, there's one last thing we need to do, and that is to make sure the spindle is mounted at the proper height. Now, you can maybe vary this a little bit, but I'm going to suggest very strongly that you start off with my recommendations, and that is a 105 millimeter spacing from the bottom of the spindle mount to the very bottom of the spindle with no tool mounted. So if you just take something like this and measure, that should be 105 millimeters. So if that's 105 millimeters, you're ready to move on. And the first step in assembly is to take the slide mount and set it on top of the spindle mount. And that's why we wanted to get that adjustment first, because we're blocking these holes now. Okay, so we have to take this off if we want to make additional adjustments to that. Okay, so I'm going to use the M5s that came in the kit and go right in here. Now, these are through holes, so you can mount something else on top here if you wanted to, whether it's a camera or a laser or whatever, and use these same holes. You might need a little bit longer screws than what you would have otherwise, but they're still accessible. And you've also got, you'll notice these threaded inserts here. They are available for accessory mounting as well, and I have them on 20 millimeter centers so that you could mount a linear rail there. Those are M3s, so an M3 will fit perfectly. All right, so we have that. Now the next step here is to attach the leg to the piston. And the way that goes is you have the piston arranged with the foot down, and you have the leg with the inserts facing you. And there's these two holes you'll see. You'll put an M3 screw in each of those and tighten them up, and they'll hit these two. In order for them to line up, the top should be flush and the sides should be flush. And I'm going to try to do this in front of the camera, which is kind of awkward, but I'll see if I can make it happen. So I'm just dropping my M3s in those holes to begin with, because that's easiest for getting those started. Now, I believe I'm a little bit too high. Okay, that might do it. So I'm just tightening that up. That one's good. And I'm not getting super tight on this stuff because nothing we're doing is, you know, a lot of pressure. I'm just kind of trying to get things snug. And that's good enough. Okay, so now I have my leg attached to the piston. The piston pretty much moves up and down at this point pretty freely. Now we're ready to mount the leg onto the slide. And these little inserts here are in these protrusions, the recess into the protrusions. That's going to slide into the rail. And this is a super tight fit. So one thing to note here, and I'm going to try to clean this stuff up beforehand, but just as part of the process of inserting these inserts and having such thin walls right there, the plastic kind of pushes out a little bit. So I clean them off with a chisel just to make sure that's flush. Because there's such a tight fit with a very tight tolerance, if there's a bump there, it's not going to fit in the slot. So I'll try to clean that up before they ship, but if you find in your particular case that it's snug, that might be why. So that's the first thing that I would check. But I'm just going to slide that in from the back, put the T-slot on, and then put a thumb screw in to get it started. Okay. And that's on. And now I can see that first thumb screw should line up. I'm going to get him snug to begin with. Okay. And then I have another thumb screw here. And it should be already lined up. Okay. Now, you will have some adjustment here in the way this boot rides up and down here based on this. What you'll want to watch for, I guess we'll show that in a little bit, but just to make sure that nothing crashes into the bottom here. That's the main thing you want to look for. Okay, so I'm going to start with it down pretty low, and we'll go from there. Okay, so that is now in a decent spot. The next thing we'll do is we'll put the riser on the boot, or on the sweep part here. Here's the riser, and here's the boot, and their sweep, and it's the same alignment and same shape, no matter if it's the 2.5 or the 4-inch boot. So, oops. So that's just 2 M5s, and that's all that takes there. Just 2 M5s. Go ahead and kind of drop those in the holes, and get them started here. Okay. And again, I'm not going super tight. I just want to make sure this stuff's snug. Okay, now this will ultimately fit around the spindle and slide up or down. Before that can happen, though, we need to have our linear rail in place. And I cautioned, I think, about this earlier in the video, but these little clips sit on the bottom to prevent the carriage from going up or from coming down and sliding right off. And if it does slide off, it may drop some of the bearings right out of the carriage right off the bat. And if it doesn't, it's likely to do it when you try to put the carriage back on. So I'd be very careful to avoid that scenario. Otherwise, you're going to be on the ground looking for little BBs to put back in here. But the way this will mount is on the side here, there are 4 threaded inserts, and we're going to use all 4. I mean, I'm going to give you enough screws for all 4. I don't know if you actually need all 4. And we're going to mount it up, starting at the bottom hole and the bottom 4 holes. We are not going to have it ride extra high or extra low. Bottom 4 holes are going to line up with those inserts. So that's how we'll do that. And that'll be some M3s. Let me grab the right wrench. So, okay, so right through the carriage or through the rail, lined up with the bottom hole. And there we go. And I don't want this guy to, I don't want this guy to fall on me. So I'm gonna, you know, kind of wedge him up at the top. But I do not want that thing coming off. And you can see how it wants to slide down. I had the wrench there to block it, but it is not to be trusted. You can end up with some serious problems there. You don't want to go off the top or the bottom, because you will be sorry. Okay. And then one more of these. Okay. Okay. And I think I'm lined up there. Come on, get in the hole. What's happening? Let me loosen a couple of these up a little bit. Okay. Okay, now he's snug. 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 And snug. Now, it'll hold, that clip will probably hold the carriage without a problem. It won't hold anything else though. So you can't, with the boot attached, the weight of the boot will pull that clip right off and you'll have problems. So we don't want to have that issue. So we're not going to attach the boot to this to even make it a possibility yet. And if you want to be really safe, you can do something like this to prevent it from, you know, now I just can't have that thing fall on me. So I don't know if I'm going to have that luxury for long, but I've done things like that to keep it from falling in the past, and it seems like that's working okay. Our next step here is to attach the main body to the foot. And the way we're going to do that is, you can see here, if we get this lined up correctly, this little bump will line up with the little bump here, and the inside radius will line up with the inside, with kind of where that track would go. And if you want to, you know, visualize maybe that a little bit easier, you can pop a piece of track on there, and then this will just fit like that up against the track. So there's two holes lined up with the threaded inserts. We're going to put those in right now. Okay, so those are moving, and you might notice that these cap screw heads are a tight fit, and that's by design, so that I can have more material, even if it's a tiny amount more material, around those screw heads and around the inserts to make this as strong as I can make it. Because I'm dealing with I'll put a lot of stuff in a small space, so I'm trying to be as conscious as I can of the strength of what we're putting together here. Okay, so that then fits right on. I can leave that on, take it off, it doesn't matter. The next step we're going to do here is we're going to mount this to the foot of that piston. This foot to the plunger, or the foot on the plunger of the piston. So I'll take two more M4s, and we're going to hold the boot up, so that there's no chance really that carriage is going to get moved, because that's the thing we're worried about this whole time, is that carriage. So first, I'm going to line this up. Actually, I'm going to push the boot down to start with, and conscious of the carriage there, and start this first one just by hand. Okay, now it'll support its own weight, even though I've barely got it on there. I don't have to worry about much at the moment. I'm going to start the second one again by hand. I'm doing that by hand because my wrench doesn't fit underneath with the boot in the down position like that. But now that I got them both secured, and it's easier to navigate around the boot and everything with it down, now I'm going to move it up, being real careful with that carriage, and I'm going to get those snugged up. Okay. And come on, baby. Where are you? Okay, now the boot is snugged and we're ready to attach the carriage, probably. Now, I just want to check here, when I come down and that carriage is up here, that I'm going to be safe, right? I don't have any problems there, and I don't. And I want to check that when I come up, fully up, I'm not hitting here, the top of the collar does not hit the bottom of the spindle mount. And that'll be important for you to check when you make adjustments too. As I raise the boot, I will obviously reduce that distance, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. The final thing to pay attention to is to make sure that the bottom of the rail doesn't touch this part of the sweep. So you shouldn't, as long as this isn't crashing into this shouldn't be crashing into this, but I would always check things just to be super safe. Now I'm ready to take some M3s and get this carriage attached. Okay. And then I can stop worrying about the carriage. Okay. 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 I'm putting all 4 screws in there because why not? I don't think structurally they're necessary, but I don't see a reason not to do it. It's not like I'm going to be taking this apart a lot. I mean, I probably am, but you aren't. I doubt. Okay. Now we have the boot mounted, and we can kind of move it around for test purposes. And I just grab the bottom of the piston and move it that way. And it should move up and down freely. It might scream a little bit if something's rubbing, and that's not unusual. The tolerances here are very tight on the Onefinity machine. On the Z20 slider, there's not a lot of room. And I'm trying to make these things as thick as they can be, just for structural integrity. So if it rubs a little bit, no big deal. So that moves up and down, and we don't have any problems. So I'm happy with that. Now we're going to attach the air hose fittings. And what you do is you take one of these mag rings and glue it in place. You could use super glue. I personally like the idea of hot glue better because it's not permanent. I always peel that off and do it again. It's a little bit uglier, but if you can get over that, it's a pretty good solution that doesn't make you have to buy a new ring if you have to change something. And similarly, you'll want to glue the other ring to the air hose adapter. And you'll want to glue it such that when the air hose adapter goes down, that ring is fitting. So you wouldn't want to put it on backwards such that the magnets won't connect. So be careful not to do something silly like that. I mean, I don't think you would, but that wouldn't be correct. This is the correct orientation. And these adapters will lock in every other turn. So it's like they want to fight each other and then they want to lock. They want to fight each other and then they want to lock. So get that going. Insert this into your air hose and tighten it down with your hose clamp. And the hose clamp is not included. I think you can handle a hose clamp. And I'll get that a little bit on. Okay. And again, I'm not going super snug. I don't want to crush this thing. I just want to have it not come off. Okay, so that's assembled minus the fact that I haven't actually glued anything. Now we can take our track on and off as we please. You can put a piece of brush in there, and you will probably need to trim the brush as you do this. Well, first of all, I know you will, because the brushes are longer than necessary, but I always trim those to be so the brush kind of follows that curve. I'm real careful not to cut myself. I always worry about that. And I'm also real careful not to put too much pressure on this thin piece of plastic, because you could break this without, it's not made out of steel, right? So got to be careful not to put so much pressure on there that you break it. Another thing to be careful of is, especially in cold weather, if you bend these brush backs too abruptly, they'll snap in half and you'll have two pieces of brush. So you don't want to do that either. So I just kind of gently work it in, and then once I get it all the way in, I might come back around with like a screwdriver or something and poke it in there so that it's fully in as deep as it'll go. And I honestly haven't been doing anything more to hold them in place. That does the trick for me. They're not in there like snug as a bug, or whatever. They're not in there so hard that it's hard to get them in, but they're in there good enough to stay. And if you don't like it, you can always run a bead of hot glue around the inside or outside or something and handle it that way. I am happy with it like this, though. It's working fine for me. And then after you get those trimmed with a knife, because they don't go on great, right, with that brush hanging out the back, then you can swap these in and out however you like. Now our brush is assembled, or our boot is assembled. We are ready to begin the setup. One more thing I didn't explicitly mention, but you probably already handled, was on the back of the Masso, those GX12 connectors need to be connected. So the cable that comes from the solenoid needs to be secured down, and the cable that comes from the boot needs to be secured down. The last thing before we do some software configuration is to actually connect some of this stuff up. So, I'm going to start with the 3-pin GX12 that connects to the top of the boot here. Just connect that in. It'll only go the one way that it's supposed to go, so it is keyed. Okay, here we go. And then tighten down the collar. And then on the air hoses, I'm just going to pop one of those into each of the quick disconnects. At this point, it doesn't really matter which one, because we're going to end up, we got a 50-50 chance of swapping it, and I figure that's easy enough. Okay, now we are ready to get air to the system. All right, now I've got it connected, and it is time to power up the Masso. All right, one last thing before we power the machine on. The system by default comes with cap screws that are sticking out of this this hole here, and on the other side of the machine on the opposite foot. And these are essentially acting like set screws to hold this rail in, I believe. Those are not going to clear the boot. So before you power on, you need to remove them. In your baggie, I have included 2 M5 set screws or grub screws to replace those with. So pull those out. The big cap screws with the head sticking out about 5 millimeters, and place in it the M5 grub screws and secure that rail back down. So that is critical. Otherwise, unless your machine is different than mine, the boot is going to run into those stock screws. Now we're almost ready to turn on the Masso. Before we do it, we want to talk about a couple things. First, we want to be super cautious about what can crash into the boot or what the boot can crash into. The boot's going to move on us when we plug this thing in, very likely. And so we don't want it to be in a position where it could smash into something or that it could crash into something on its way to home. So that's something to be very cautious of. Also, we want to make sure that we don't have our tool racks located in a position where they're going to be in the way of going home. Mine are close. They're fine, but they're close. You'll want to be extra cautious, at least when we're getting started here, to make sure that you're not going to run into problems there. Once we have that, let's go ahead and turn the Masso on. Okay. Now, you saw that and heard it slam down, and that's at 75 PSI. Now, I'm going to hit the E-stop to stop that screaming and pull it back out, but I'm not going to home yet because, well, I guess I can home. I'm sure nothing's going to crash on me, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Now, I don't have a tool in here, so I'm going to fake the funk and just touch the tool setter to tell it that it's good to go, because I don't want it to just error on me. Okay. So I'm going to give it a second here and then say, all right, there's a tool. Okay. So I've lied to it, but it's no longer blinking and flicking that tower relay on me all the time. Okay. So you heard that boot crash down. That's not what we want. We want it to gently go down, firmly, but gently. And we want the same thing to happen when we go up. So that's what these mufflers are for. They are adjustable. You can unscrew them, and that will allow them to release the air more quickly, which means the boot will slam harder, and you can screw them in, which would mean that the boot would move more slowly. And they have this stop ring on them so that you can, like, say, I had to screw this one out, and I don't know which one's which at the moment, but we're gonna, I've screwed it out, and I'm giving it a little bit of air, and now I'm tightening that ring down a little bit to change it. So that, I'm gonna restrict that side of the boot more, okay? So I got a 50-50 chance that's what I wanted to do, but that's the basic operation of those mufflers. You're gonna wanna play with the adjustment of the mufflers to make sure it moves up smoothly and down smoothly when your dust collection's on, okay? That's the key. The dust collector has the ability to create suction that will want to pull the boot up. So you'll need less pressure going up with the dust collector on than you would with it off, and you'll probably want to tune it with the dust collector on. And the opposite is true for the dust boot going down. The dust collector has the potential to create suction, making it harder to go down. So you'll want to tune that as well. And we're just going for something that, again, that's nice firm movement that doesn't smash in any case, right? We want to be gentle to the equipment. So here we are at the Masso. I'm going to go into the setup screen, okay? Password. And now you got to remember the inputs and outputs that you chose earlier. I'm using input 3 for my tool changer 3. That's the dust boot sensor. So we're going to go find tool changer 3. Select. Now you can see it's also high right now, and my boot is down, so that's wrong. That's not what we want. So you'll need to invert. And unless you're doing something funky here, you're going to need to invert this so that it reads low when it's supposed to read low and high when it's supposed to read high. That's just the way that I have this system created. Now on input 17, which is where I wired the yellow wire that goes to the relay, I want to make that's output 17, tool changer 1. That's going to control the dust boot with this type of tool changer. And this is assuming we're using the Pwn CNC system as they have it set up, which is as a linear tool rack 2. And just while we're here, if I go to tool changer, linear tool changer type 2, if yours says linear tool changer type 2, that's what you're using. Perfect. That's what Pwn CNC had us do when they had us set it up. Then change your whatever input you used to tool changer 3, inverted. Whatever output you used to tool changer 1, not inverted. Okay. Now, additionally, if you use the Pwn CNC PE, you're going to want to go into output 8 and just toggle it. Okay. Now, in my case, I'm not using it, so you heard the air kick on. That's going to put pressure to the solenoid, and you just leave it there. Okay. You won't have it set up for anything. Its function here, right, is going to be blank, but you'll need to have it on all the time. Now, in my case, I'm going to use that for the coolant mist, so I can control it through my CAM software and use it for my air blast when I mill aluminum. So that's how I'm going to have that set up. Not really a part of this, but I think that's a cool thing to think about when you're deciding how you want to set this up. Now, note here real quick, my boot's down. Tool changer input 3 is low. I come over to here on the program MDI, hit my MDI screen, and it's going to say right now, move dust hood up, which makes sense because it's currently down. Now, if yours is backwards, all you have to do is swap air hoses on one end. So either on the solenoid, swap the left and right air hoses, or on the boot, on the top of the piston, swap the air hoses. And that will move the boot in the opposite direction and make it correspond perfectly with, like, the state of the boot correspond with what the menu says. Now, I am going to go ahead and move dust hood up. And it moved up, but it did it kind of, wimpy like. So I probably need to allow that side of I need to adjust that part of the muffler to allow it to pull up a little bit harder, probably. Because I want it to come up firmly, and that wasn't quite firmly. Now, at the same time, I'm up, okay? So that means that if we go over to our setup screen, we should see tool changer, 3 is now high, and it is. That means the sensor is being detected like it should be. So that's what we want to see, okay? Now I have some work to do to adjust my mufflers to get them tuned in the way I want. I won't bore you with that, but that process needs to happen here. It needs to happen probably in your setup too, so you're not slamming the boot up and down constantly. Let's get a real quick though, just for curiosity's sake, that adjustment I made earlier, and I said move down, bam, it is still slamming. So I'm going to need to do some further adjustment. I may have adjusted the wrong side. I'll have to figure that out. But I want that to be gentle. I don't want it to be like that. Okay, so now we are here. Now, the things I think you should know in running this is, first of all, the boot's going to do what the boot's supposed to do during tool changes, and you can't really affect that. It's going to move up, go do the tool change, and then move back down. And when the system boots up, it's going to do whatever it does with the boot in whatever state it is, and you need to be prepared not to have it crash into anything. That's very important. You may have a setup where the boot would crash into something. If it does, before you home, you need to manually control the dust boot to move it to the up position so it's out of the way. So that's potentially on you if you have an environment where homing would cause the boot to crash into something. If not, you're likely going to break something, and that's gonna be a bummer. So you got to be very careful about that. That's another thing about CNC, right? They're just not forgiving. You tell it to do something and it does it. And if it breaks something in the process, that's your fault, not its. So that's one thing. The other thing to know is this MDI screen can be used whenever to override what the boot is supposed to be doing. So you could use that during a milling job to raise the boot so you can watch what's going on. If you wanted to film your cut, for example, with a camera mounted on the accessory mount, you could do that. Just manually move the boot up. It's going to be messy, but hey, that is possible. Another thing to think about here, just in the way this boot is designed to pay attention to, this collar, obviously I think I mentioned this before, you don't want to raise this up so much that the collar bangs into the bottom of the spindle mount. That's part of the reason why I suggested that 105 millimeters, because it gives you enough distance to work with where I think you're going to be okay in most setups. When you move it down, and I'm going to violently move it down again, okay, you want, during normal milling operations, if you can do it, you want to have the collar above the bottom of the boot so that it has a better seal. That's going to be important for performance. Okay, so it's going to have better suction if it has a better seal, so you have to kind of pay attention to that when you're making adjustments. And this is one of the reasons why different brush lengths are really handy, because you can use the brush length to allow you to have the collar up higher because you've got a longer brush that reaches the material, and that will give you better suction with a longer brush. At the same time, there is a trade-off. Inside the boot, there is a mouth where this thing is open, sucking to the right, okay? So there is a bottom of the mouth, which is just above the floor. It's like 4 or 5 millimeters up. And there is a top of the mouth, which is, I forget, let's just say 30 millimeters up. I don't remember what it is. But you don't want the mouth to be covered up by the spindle. If you do, you're going to reduce the size of the mouth, which will increase the size of the opportunity for clogging to happen. So if you had long stringy material that was coming off the machine, it might have a harder time getting sucked through a smaller mouth. You'll also probably have less suction in general through a smaller mouth. So that's nothing to pay attention to when you're making adjustments to the height of the boot. Generally speaking, you want to leave the mouth as open as possible while having the collar cover a little bit of this to close that seal. Now, those are the notes that I would give you to begin with. You will become familiar with the system, and you may discover things and ways to optimize it and pitfalls to avoid that I haven't even dreamt of yet. If you do, I'm more than welcome hearing them. I think that wraps up a really long installation video. I'm sorry for the length of that, but it's important to go through all that detail, and I hope that this makes sense and guides you through the installation process very successfully. You know what? There is one more tip, I guess, that I want to share, and that is one thing I've noticed. If you're pushing the boot down with extreme force or too much force like I was, and possibly even with a lot of force, maybe not too much, but maybe more than necessary, and at the same time, you don't have these thumb screws locked down tight, when it goes down, it's going to yank the boot down on this T-slot. So wherever you had it adjusted, it will end up lower. So you'll want to be very careful to be sure that you have your mufflers adjusted correctly and your air pressure in balance with your muffler settings, and that these are locked down tight so that the boot doesn't yank down when it is being put to the down position. So that is one other operational note, I guess, that I can share with you that I have seen happen when I've had those in there too loose. With that though, I think that's really it. Thank you so much for your support and your interest in the Sidekick. I'm really happy with this boot. It definitely performs for me better than I thought it would. It's actually a very good performing boot. I hope you have the same experience with it. Thank you.